Hello everybody and welcome to day 2 of the Daily Language Diary. And in this episode, I have a really nice topic for you. It's a simple technique that I just observed myself doing yesterday as I'm getting back into French. And I think this is so important in not just developing good pronunciation, but in learning to speak in a natural way and really embracing and absorbing the character of the language that you're speaking. So if you're missing out on this technique, I think it's a mistake, and I think you could be making a lot more progress if you give this a try. So let's talk about that. I'm going to show you a bit more into how I'm studying French today, and I've got a really nice project for today's daily gratitude drawing.
Salut Anne.
Salut Anne.
Salut Anne. Tu connais Paris?
Non.
Non. Tu veux un poisson? Tu connais Paris? Non. Tu veux un poisson? Oh oui!
Oh oui.
So as I was studying just now, one thing that came to my mind is how, for me, it's always been so important and valuable to not only repeat things out loud when you're studying, but to really try to get into the character and to try to copy the intonation, the rhythm, and imagining yourself in a certain scenario. It's really fun to imagine yourself as an actor or actress and you're trying to sound the part. And in my opinion, you can do this really early on. I don't tend to worry about fossilizing mistakes and things like this. I think it's far more valuable to start using your mouth and start trying to get into character. Because for me, when I'm studying a language from the beginning, by the time I get through like a beginner course, or let's say the first few levels of Babel, I will have practiced saying these things millions of times. I will have made so much progress in getting my muscles used to making those sounds, just repeating. But not only that, like I said, it's also starting to internalize the character of people who speak those languages. And so take a look at these 3 phrases. They're so simple. This is like a complete beginner lesson.
Salut Anne. C'est oui ou non? Merci pour les fleurs.
So I think a lot of people will do this.
Salut Anne.
Salut Anne.
Merci pour les fleurs.
Merci pour les fleurs.
C'est oui ou non?
C'est oui ou non. That's a really common thing to hear. If people are repeating, most people don't even repeat out loud. But for me, it should be like this.
Salut Anne.
Salut Anne. Oh, salut Anne. Salut. Salut Anne.
C'est oui ou non?
C'est oui ou non. C'est oui ou non. Right? It's so subtle, but it's really important.
Merci pour les fleurs.
Merci pour les fleurs. Salut Anne. Merci pour les fleurs. Merci pour les fleurs. Right? It's really subtle. It may not even sound that different. And there's going to be other examples where it would be more pronounced. But I think even from these early beginner sentences, it's so helpful to just put in that effort. It's a mindset thing, but it really makes a difference. So it's not Salut Anne, it's Salut Anne, Salut. Now, of course, I have a lot more experience with French, so it's a bit easier for me to repeat things quickly, but it's not about the speed. It's really just about the effort and the intentionality of trying to replicate the rhythm, the intonation, and the emotional quality of what you're studying. And this actually works brilliantly for languages like Mandarin and Cantonese, where you have tones and pitches to worry about. In case you're not familiar, I actually documented myself learning Mandarin from scratch. And there's a video where I talked about how I was not going to be studying tones super mechanically. And of course I would look at them, but I was going to be far more reliant on just my ability to mimic and practice and try to copy these sounds and how they actually come out in a sentence, and just really trying to capture that emotional quality. And I think it worked really beautifully. So In the description or comment below, I will link to that series where I documented my Mandarin journey. And I'll also link to a specific video where I actually had like a 45-minute conversation, all in Mandarin, completely unedited, unscripted, with a friend from Taiwan. And, I actually think by the end of my time studying Mandarin, I often got comments about how I spoke more in a Taiwanese kind of way, and people would actually recognize that in my speech. I'm not saying I was a brilliant speaker, but that's something that people often noticed. And I think that comes from this kind of practice, because over time, it starts to enable you to start mimicking specific regional accents or things like that. And it makes it so fun. And honestly, for me personally, this is one of the true joys of actually speaking in a different language. If you're learning Italian, for example, one of the most fun parts for me is actually learning over time to play the character of an Italian and blending that with your own authentic personality. There is nothing more fun than being completely engaged in a conversation with an Italian person and you're expressing yourself just like they are, you're using the hands, even if it's not totally correct, and you're just in that moment with them in a way that can only happen when you have that sort of reciprocal Italian feel. It's really hard to describe. And then if you're learning Spanish, let's say you look at people from Spain, and when you see the way that they express humor, it is just brilliant. And so if you can try to also embrace that and try to participate in that, it is so fun. And then if you start encountering people from different Latin American countries and you see the way that they express themselves is very different. For example, in Spain, if you say something like, que riquísimo, right? It's super tasty. In my experience, people think it's a bit exaggerated. It's kind of like, just say que rico, right? But if you're in certain countries in Latin America, it's much more common to express yourself in this way, which personally I find really nice. Or using diminutives like saying ahorita, a little, just right now, versus ahora. Again, they're just different, and it's such a joy to start embracing that. And you see how starting from this place of just trying to replicate that emotional quality, the rhythm, the accent, etc., it quickly starts to bleed into actually getting to know deeper parts of the language, because it builds this curiosity inside of you. If you're gonna actually learn to play the character of a Mexican person, for example, then that requires a certain level of research and understanding, and it goes beyond just the accent and the pronunciation. It goes into the actual words they say. And I think you cultivate that curiosity, or at least one way to do that is starting early on and just really enjoying learning to play the character. And one last comment I'll make about this is, I think the hardest part can be being scared of sounding silly, but 2 points on that. First of all, I'm just practicing at home right now. Nobody else has to hear this if you're not a YouTuber. And you don't have to worry about how other people are going to interpret these things at the beginning, because you're just practicing. And what I have found is that if you practice this way at home by yourself, when you start speaking to people, even if you're not trying, these things will just organically come out. So it's not like you have to purposefully try to play a role. This is just how we train ourselves. This is how we practice. And then I find when you're in a real life situation talking to a real person, then it sort of just naturally blends in with your authentic self. And it's a really beautiful thing. And my last little tip here is that even when you are speaking with real people, you don't have to do this in a serious way. In fact, if you actually play with this kind of stuff, it can be a wonderful way to make people laugh. It kind of breaks the ice, and it shows people that you do have this cultural knowledge of the way they speak and you're making an effort to learn it, but it takes the pressure off having to actually be perfectly accurate. So to give you a couple of examples from when I was learning Mandarin and I was really focusing in on how Taiwanese people speak, I would often say things like, 真的假的? In a really kind of exaggerated way. And people knew right away that I was kind of kidding, and it always evoked some laughter. People found it kind of funny. They didn't expect me to say something like that. And another example is with the endings that Taiwanese people use on the end of sentences. So for example, let's say I tasted some food for the first time and I was like, 超好吃耶, right? This ending, that's something that's very typical in Taiwan. And even if I used it incorrectly, people would be really surprised and pleasantly happy that I am at least trying to speak like they do, because they can be very proud of how they speak. And then they might correct me. And so I remember when I first started trying to use this specific ending, I frequently got it wrong, but it was always funny and it was always a good time. But over time, people would start to try to correct me and try to help me figure out how to use that ending more naturally. And so one of the things I found is that it's more common to use this ending when you're surprised about something. So using that ending almost implies that you're kind of surprised by how good that food really tastes. So I hope you found this to be an interesting and useful tip. I would really love to know if you have tried this or if you have the same experience. And if you disagree, that's totally okay. I would love to hear all about your thoughts in the comments.